Welcome back to Tell Me More Stories Told as Podcast. We dig deep into some fascinating stories from history and current events. Today we're going to be talking about a story that continues to haunt us, a tragedy that changed the way we think about school safety forever. The Columbine High School Massacre.
Columbine, it draws you in. It wasn't just a spontaneous act of violence. It was planned out, meticulously detailed, almost like they were writing a script for a horror movie. But this was real life.
So let's back up. We're talking about Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, two seniors at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. On April 20th, 1999, they unleashed this horrifying attack. 13 people were killed and countless others were scarred. But who are these young men? Were they just troubled loners like the media often portrayed?
It's more complicated than that. Both Harris and Klebold, they had friends. Some were even close. They weren't these stereotypical social outcasts. It's fascinating how their personalities differed. Harris, he had this dark online persona filled with rage and violent fantasies. He even created a website with bomb-making instructions. And believe it or not, it caught the attention of a classmate's parents.
Wait, so someone actually knew about Harris's disturbing activity online before the attack?
Yes, Brooks Brown's parents. They were so alarmed by one of his blog posts that mentioned their son that they called the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. And get this, a year before the massacre, Harris and Klebold were actually arrested for breaking into a van. And they stole electronic equipment.
So there were definite red flags, even a run-in with the law. So what happened after the arrest?
Well, they were both sentenced to a diversion program. You know, it's a second chance for juvenile offenders. It involved counseling and community service. But looking back, it just seems like a missed opportunity to look a little deeper into their psychological states. I mean, imagine if someone had just taken a closer look and recognized the darkness that was brewing beneath the surface.
It's a chilling thought. It makes you wonder, what could have been done differently if anyone could have foreseen the tragedy that was to come?
Right, and it's not just their online activities or their criminal record. Their schoolwork contains some disturbing hints, their creative writing assignments, even their yearbook messages. You know, Klebold wrote a message in Harris's yearbook talking about killing enemies and getting revenge in the commons, the school cafeteria.
Oh, wow. That just sends chills down your spine, knowing that they were essentially hinting at their plans in plain sight. And wasn't this the same cafeteria where they planted those propane bombs? The ones that thankfully didn't detonate?
Exactly. Imagine the devastation if those bombs had actually gone off. Their plan was meticulously thought out. They intended to set off those bombs during peak lunch hour, potentially killing hundreds of students.
It's a miracle those bombs failed. And speaking of their plans, didn't they also make videos documenting their intentions? The basement tapes, right?
Yes, the basement tapes. A series of home videos recorded by Harris and Klebold in Harris's basement. In the months leading up to the attack, they laid out their plans, their motivations, even their methods of deceiving their parents about what they were doing. One of the most disturbing videos is titled Hitman for Hire.
Yeah, I've heard about this one.
In this video, they portray themselves as members of the Trench Coat Mafia, a group of students at Columbine who wore black trench coats, although Harris and Klebold weren't actually part of the group. It's this dark, almost comedic scenario. They're extorting money from students for protection from bullies, wielding fake guns, spouting threats. It's a strange mix of dark humor and chilling foreshadowing, you know, knowing what they were actually planning.
And it's even more disturbing that they actually planned to release these tapes to the public. Almost like they wanted to turn the massacre into some kind of twisted media spectacle.
That seems like it was their intention, yeah. Thankfully, those tapes were destroyed by investigators out of concern for inspiring copycats. Just imagine the impact those tapes would have had if they had been released. It's a scary thought.
Well, if you're finding this deep dive as gripping as we are, hit that subscribe button and stay with us. We'll be right back with more on the Columbine High School Massacre.
Now, let's talk about their weapons. It wasn't just guns. They had pipe bombs, Molotov cocktails, and those propane bombs we mentioned earlier.
Wait, how did two teenagers even get their hands on all of this?
Well, that's where things get complicated. And it really highlights the issues around gun control. You know, the issues we still debate today. They were too young to legally purchase firearms, so they relied on friends and acquaintances. A friend, Robin Anderson, bought 2 shotguns and a carbine rifle for them at a gun show, and then they obtained a Tech-9 handgun through a coworker, Philip Duran, who purchased it from Mark Maines.
So there were others involved in getting these weapons. What happened to them?
Well, Anderson claimed she had no idea about their plan. She believed that they just wanted the weapons for target practice. However, Maines, and Duran. They were prosecuted for supplying firearms to minors. This case really underscores the complexities of gun control and the responsibility that we all share in preventing these tragedies.
It's just a stark reminder that even seemingly ordinary teenagers, if they're driven by dark intentions and given access to weapons, can inflict unimaginable harm.
Exactly. And what makes Columbine even more intriguing, maybe even disturbing, is that among their arsenal were these homemade explosives called crickets.
Crickets? What are those?
These were small pipe bombs. They cobbled them together with gunpowder and CO2 cartridges. They were designed to make this loud popping noise, hence the name crickets. It's believed they were intended to create distraction and chaos, driving people towards the larger bombs.
Wow. That's scary. Their plan wasn't just about brute force. There was this level of calculation to it, almost a strategic element to their madness. That just makes it even more unsettling.
Exactly. Now let's shift our focus to the morning of April 20th, 1999, the day that would forever be etched in the annals of history as one of the darkest days in American education.
Let's talk about the hours leading up to the shooting. What do we know about their movements, their state of mind?
They planned to set off those propane bombs in the cafeteria at 11:17 a.m., right during the peak lunch period.
Oh, those bombs didn't go off.
Yeah, thankfully. It was after this that their plan shifted to more of a direct confrontation.
So their movements in the parking lot, just moments before those first shots were fired. It kind of gives us a glimpse into their state of mind, especially Harris's encounter with Brooks Brown, right there in the parking lot.
It's a chilling encounter. Brown, who was actually skipping class that day, ran into Harris, who was surprisingly absent from a test.
Wow.
When Brown asked him about it, Harris simply replied, "It doesn't matter anymore."
Whoa. It's almost as if he knew what was about to happen.
Right. He then told Brown, "Brooks, I like you now. Get out of here. Go home." A sentence just loaded with subtext, knowing what was about to happen.
It's a really haunting detail. And then the shooting began.
Yes. It started at 11:19 a.m. with the shooting of Rachel Scott and Richard Castaldo. Outside the school, Rachel was killed instantly, and Richard was severely wounded.
It's heartbreaking to think about those first victims.
The violence just escalated so quickly. Harris and Klebold, they moved through the school, firing seemingly at random, throwing pipe bombs, causing complete chaos and terror.
What about the police response? Weren't there officers at the school?
Yeah, Deputy Neil Gardner. He was the school resource officer. He was on campus. But he wasn't aware of the situation inside. Initially, he actually engaged in a shootout with Harris outside the school, but he wasn't able to stop them from getting inside.
It must have been chaotic.
Absolutely. But amidst that chaos, there were incredible stories of courage, like that of teacher Dave Sanders.
Oh, tell me about Dave Sanders.
Dave Sanders was a beloved business teacher and coach. He risked his own life to evacuate students. Tragically, he was shot in the hallway, and he died hours later. Despite the best efforts of the students and teachers who tried to save him, his actions undoubtedly saved lives.
Oh, that's truly heroic.
Now let's talk about one of the most harrowing aspects of the Columbine Massacre, the library massacre.
This is the part that really sticks with me. The images, the survivor testimonies. It's just so hard to even process.
Yeah, it's where the majority of the killings took place. And the details are truly chilling. Harris and Klebold entered the library. Around 11:29 a.m., there were about 56 people inside. Students, teachers, librarians.
And they just started shooting.
Well, not exactly. They first shouted for all the athletes to stand up, taunting them, threatening them. It was a deliberate act of psychological terror.
Almost like they were trying to create a scene from one of those violent video games.
It's a chilling but apt comparison. They seemed to relish in the fear and the chaos they were creating, but no one stood up.
And that's when they started shooting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Their rampage turned deadly. One of the first victims was Kyle Velasquez, a student with disabilities who was just sitting at a computer. He was shot at point-blank range.
Senseless.
There are also accounts of them using racial slurs and targeting Isaiah Schulz, a black student. He was hiding under a table with two other students, Matthew Kechter and Craig Scott.
Wait, Craig Scott? Wasn't he Rachel Scott's younger brother?
He was. Craig witnessed his sister's murder earlier, and then he found himself hiding under the same table where his friend Isaiah Schulz was killed.
Oh my gosh. It's unimaginable to go through something like that. How did he even survive?
He played dead, lying in the blood of his friends. It's really a testament to his resilience, his will to live.
It's just incredible. The stories of the survivors are just as important as the stories of those who were lost.
Absolutely. They offer valuable insights into the psychological impact of this kind of trauma.
Right.
Take, for instance, Evan Todd. He was standing near a pillar when the shooters came in, and he was hit by debris from the first shots. He was able to take cover behind a copier and eventually hid under the administrative counter.
So he witnessed everything from his hiding spot.
Yes. And it's remarkable how he describes their demeanor. He said they seemed to be enjoying themselves, laughing, shouting, almost giddy with this power they held over their victims.
It's just disturbing. Did they interact with anyone else directly?
There are accounts of them taunting students, questioning them before shooting them. One of the most controversial stories is that of Cassie Bernal.
Oh. The story about her being asked if she believed in God.
Yes, but there's actually been a lot of debate about the accuracy of that account. The closest witness to her death, Emily Wyant, has denied that that exchange took place. Other witnesses have said that the question was directed at Feline Schnur, a different student.
So it's possible that this story that has become such a big part of the Columbine narrative might not be true.
It just highlights how hard it is to piece together a completely accurate account of such a chaotic and traumatic event. You have conflicting memories, eyewitness accounts that don't always line up, and then you have the media sensationalism.
It's crucial to be aware of those complexities, so we're not perpetuating myths and misinformation.
Exactly. We have to approach these stories with sensitivity and a commitment to the truth.
Let's talk about the end of the library massacre.
Yeah.
How did it end?
Well, after about 20 minutes of terror, Harris and Klebold, they just abruptly left the library. It's unclear why they stopped shooting. Some speculate that they ran out of ammunition, while others believe they were just ready to move on to the next phase of their plan.
And what about the survivors in the library?
Well, most of them managed to escape through an emergency exit while the shooters were gone. But two students, Patrick Ireland and Lisa Kreutz, were left behind. Ireland was unconscious. He had been shot multiple times, and Kreutz was too injured to move.
It's a miracle that they survived.
It is. Ireland's escape is pretty dramatic. He regained consciousness, and even though he was paralyzed on his right side, he managed to crawl to a library window, and his desperate attempt to climb out was captured on live television. It became one of the most iconic images from the massacre.
Oh, right. He's known as the boy in the window.
That's right. He fell from that window right into the arms of the SWAT team members below.
And Lisa Kreutz.
She was eventually rescued by SWAT teams, who entered the library hours later. She had remained conscious that whole time, lying in a pool of blood, listening to the sounds of the chaos.
Wow.
The library massacre was a concentrated burst of violence and terror. But it wasn't over yet. Harris and Klebold continued to move through the school, setting fires, shooting at random, and they ultimately ended their own lives in a final act of despair.
So let's talk about those final moments. What happened after they left the library?
Well, they went to the science area first and set a fire in a storage closet. Then they went back to the cafeteria, tried to detonate those propane bombs again.
They were really determined to cause as much destruction as possible, huh?
It seems that way. They even shot at the bombs, trying to get them to ignite.
But they failed again.
Yeah. Only a small fire started, which was quickly put out by the sprinklers.
It's almost like fate was stepping in.
It is a thought that many people have had.
What happened next?
They wandered through the school, still firing their guns, but seemingly randomly. Thankfully, no one else was hurt. Eventually, they made their way back to the library.
The library?
Yeah. It was deserted by then, except for Patrick Ireland, who was still unconscious. And Lisa Kreutz, who was injured.
Did they try to shoot them?
No. It seems like their rampage was over at that point. They fired a few shots at police outside, through the library windows. But they didn't engage in any more direct confrontations.
So what do they do?
At 12:08 p.m., both gunmen committed suicide. Harris shot himself in the mouth with his shotgun, and Klebold shot himself in the head with his Tech-9.
A truly tragic and disturbing end to a horrific chapter. What was it like at Columbine right after?
It was, the response was massive and immediate. SWAT teams surrounded the school, ambulances rushed the wounded to hospitals, families gathered at nearby Leawood Elementary, waiting for news about their loved ones.
It's hard to imagine those families just waiting, facing that horrible scenario.
And the early reports just added to the confusion. The sheriff initially estimated that there were 25 dead. Thankfully, that number turned out to be way too high.
But even with a lower death toll, the impact was just devastating.
Absolutely. 13 people were killed, plus the two shooters. And 24 were injured, many with life-altering wounds.
And even those numbers don't tell the whole story, do they?
Not even close. The psychological scars, the trauma, the ripple effect, that's the real legacy of Columbine.
It's a legacy that continues to this day. One of the biggest questions that has lingered is, of course, why? What could possibly drive two teenagers to do something like this?
That is the question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no easy answer.
The FBI concluded that Harris was a psychopath and that Klebold suffered from depression. But is that really enough to explain all of this?
Mental illness definitely played a part, but it's important not to oversimplify things. There were other factors at play, like their fascination with violence, their warped sense of reality, their access to weapons.
Right, and there's been so much debate about bullying. Were Harris and Klebold victims of relentless bullying, like some have claimed?
That narrative definitely took hold after the massacre. And while bullying was an issue at Columbine, like it is in many high schools, there's no evidence that Harris and Klebold were specifically targeted or that bullying alone was the motive.
So we're left with this really complex web of contributing factors, but no definitive answer to the why.
And that's part of what makes Columbine so unsettling. It forces us to confront the darkness that can exist within seemingly ordinary people and the warning signs that often go unnoticed.
Columbine had such a profound impact on school safety procedures and police tactics, too.
Right. The slow response of the SWAT teams at Columbine led to the development of the immediate action rapid deployment tactic. It emphasizes taking quick action to neutralize an active shooter. And schools across the country implemented stricter security measures, like metal detectors, surveillance cameras, and zero-tolerance policy.
And of course, it reignited the debate over gun control.
Definitely. The fact that Harris and Klebold were able to get those weapons illegally, even though they were too young to buy them, it really sparked calls for stricter laws, especially around background checks and the gun show loophole.
A debate that unfortunately continues to this day. You know, we hear a lot about the Columbine effect.
Yes.
Can you explain what that means?
The Columbine effect refers to the influence that this massacre has had on subsequent attacks. It's become a blueprint, almost, for other school shootings.
It's just so disturbing that Harris and Klebold, in this really twisted way, became role models for others.
And then you have this online subculture that actually glorifies the shooters. They create fan art, write fan fiction. It highlights the dangers of romanticizing violence.
Columbine was a watershed moment, a wake-up call to the reality of school violence. But beyond the security measures and policy debates, it also forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves, our society, and that darkness that can be hidden just beneath the surface.
And that conversation continues today. We're still trying to understand what happened at Columbine and how to prevent it from happening again.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Columbine. It's a story that forces us to learn from the past, to confront the present, and to work towards a future where tragedies like this no longer happen. As always, we encourage you to keep exploring these stories and to continue the conversation.